Hello and welcome to New Geometry. It's George Leoniak and I'm super excited to be here today. I have a jam-packed presentation full of new creations, and there's a little bit of something for everybody in this. If you're into the flower of life, if you're into the Cathara Grid, I'm really gonna work with those and show the golden vector matrix of how the golden ratio is incorporated into all those patterns and designs, and how they slightly differ and how they modify to incorporate all these forms of creation, or many of the forms of creation, particularly the 5 Platonic solids. So this is going to be a lot of new material. You probably haven't seen any of this anywhere out there. So definitely have an open mind of how this relates. It's all based on sacred geometry and the principles that are part of sacred geometry. And I'm going to describe how I got to many of these discoveries as we go into this. So let me share my screen and start off with this quote by Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Now, I'm certainly not into trying to make any models obsolete, but I definitely am interested in providing some new ways of looking at things and infusing some of the older models with some interesting components that have been missing from them. And actually, a whole new model did come into creation because of that. And it looks like this. So I was calling this a new creation. Probably have a better name that might come through on this. But this looks like a flower of life. It's definitely from a hexagonal perspective, but this is going to be full of the golden ratio circle pattern that's in here. And this is what the hand-drawn version looks like, with the golden ratio circles. That's based on the golden seed of life, the golden circle seed of life in the center. It's within the black circle here. And there's a new pattern that's flowering out from that along the outer edge of that circle. Now that opens up a whole new doorway, a whole new spectrum of possibilities that are just ripe and ready to blossom forth in the minds of many sacred geometers. So I'm really going to start sharing much more on this pattern. This is just going to be the start of it, but it's already been an expansive mind rabbit hole to journey down that really started with my interest in the Golden Hexagon, which we'll get to in just a little bit. Now, I said I'm going to have a little bit in here. It's going to weave within there is the Cathara Grid, which this is a pattern on the right here that is very reminiscent. I mean, the circles are all there for what they call the Ruche God seed, and I've infused that pattern. It just naturally wanted to work that way with the golden circles to incorporate the phi ratio into that pattern. And here is the other pattern that I was calling the new creation, but it's really based on the golden circle seed of life, which is going to continue to replicate around at each of these major flower petal intersections of 6 is a seed of life in each of these that are kind of interlocking within this woven pattern. And once you infuse that with the golden ratio in both of these, there's a lot of magic that happens there. These two patterns that are being presented here are totally complementary of one another. And they're really two patterns of wholeness. They're really two views of the one. So, and they're the foundation of this golden matrix. And let's talk about the phi ratio in both of these, because they're really essential to them. And there's an unsung hero in this that probably not many geometers know about, George Odom. From 1941 to 2010. Unfortunately, he's not around anymore, because I would love to connect with him and his material, because he was really kind of ahead of his time in this discovery of the phi ratio. And that is the foundation of this golden circle template. This new creation that I'm sharing much of in this video is really related to his discovery, which only was from 1983. Right? So this is not, maybe it was known in prehistory, ancient times, however far back, thousands and thousands of years you'd like to go. But at least, he sent this off to HSM Coxeter to check the analysis to make sure that this was in golden proportion. And Coxeter wrote a paper on it in 1983, validating that this equilateral triangle, basically within the seed of life, drawing across when it hits the outer circle of the seed of life, will produce the phi ratio. And, I happen to discover if you do that all the way around the seed of life, it will produce a perfect dodecahedron based off of an octahedron that is within the center of that. George Odom, I'm going to do a tribute video to him because I've just had some expansive understanding in sacred geometry just from the few little trails that he left behind in some of his work. And he's got a great background in history that I'd like to get into because he was actually in a psychiatric center, self-admitted, for trying to take his own life. And he was just fascinated with the golden ratio and producing these things. He had a relationship with the polyhedra guy, Wagner, the monk, and as well as the Coxeter, and they would share their insights, not only about sacred geometry, but also religion, philosophy. I mean, a really great story. So I'd like to get into those a little bit more. But here's another discovery that I'm not sure he drew this, but I discovered this one last night of how you can create the golden ratio at the basis very easily within this cube, extending the octahedron edge out to the outer edge, and that will also create the perfect dodecahedron. So I'm going to share more on that in the video too. But we're going to stick with this pattern here first and just show how that simple discovery of Odom, well, it's not really a simple discovery, but it really is really in plain sight. All you have to do is extend the edges of the triangle. It's amazing it took till 1983 to discover that. But all you have to do from there is extend that out along the whole star rather than it being an isolated phi ratio. Yay, we've got it, that's it. Well, how does this integrate into the wholeness of sacred geometry and the patterns that we love so dearly, that, blanket, websites or iconography that's on product clothing and all those things. Here's a totally new creation to this pattern, and all we have to do is extend those lines out and reproduce the same size circles that we started with, and then we'll get 12 circles around, and it's really that simple on the outer edge of this. And that pattern I discovered will continue to replicate and do some incredibly amazing things, which I'm about to get into in just a moment. But I've also, the key part of this is incorporating the golden circle seed of life at the beginning with the 3 phi ratio circles, so 21 circles, 7, 7, and 7. And then now we're going to extend that out. And there's actually 19 circles at 3 levels all the way on the outer edge. So this is another 19 circle quasi flower of life pattern. And maybe it's good to call it quasi because it's more related to the quasi crystal phi ratio forms than it is just the cubic system of the regular flower of life. So here is one of the first forms that emerged from the golden matrix before I really even discovered the rest of the circle pattern. But here's a hand-drawn version of that I did with my apprentices this past week. And this was just the start. When I put this form, these little golden bricks, I like to call them, because they're based on like golden brick bars of, chunks of gold, but double-sided. When I put those around and started to build them out of a golden cube octahedron, which we're going to discuss a little bit more in just a moment, when I decided to just link them all together and start building, it created a perfect star tetrahedron in the middle, which I have all the this form right here as well, which we'll take a look at at the end of the video. So it's got a big octahedron in the middle. Each of these are individual tetrahedron that are built off of that. And we've got these golden bricks that go around. But what's so great about these golden bricks? Well, I'll show you in just a moment, like why do we have these vertices out here? Well, these vertices are part of something, and they're part of what is going to turn this into something that contains the phi ratio to produce the phi ratio forms. Here it is from the square view orientation. So when we have the circle pattern and we do that form that I just showed with the tetrahedrons in the middle, and we just start linking some lines together, what it produces is a pair of mated dodecahedron that are overlapping here, sharing a central vertex in the center. And that is as simple as just following, you don't really need to draw all the circles on the outer edge, but they do help produce and get the points on the inside to generate the two dodecahedron that are kind of entwined together here in this image. And that was all that needed to happen to produce the dodecahedron. Two of them in the seed of life is just Odom's method of extending the line to the outer edge of the circle that contains the seed of life. That was it. And so it's just taking it a little bit further, a few more steps to see how it fit into the holistic vision of sacred geometry. And then we have the two dodecahedron emerge. And I decided to continue to elaborate on that by placing the circles around it to continue its pattern, which we're going to see in a moment. But let's just talk about the golden cube octahedron. So this is the golden cube octahedron. I want to compare that to the vector equilibrium, which is I got a little golden cube octahedron here. So there it is. It's got golden rectangle faces, large triangle, small triangle. All the edges are in golden proportion. We get a little window into the inside here, so we could see that there's a golden hexagon on the inside of this. And it's really made up of 4 golden hexagons, which is different than the cube octahedron, which is made up of regular hexagons. And this is a vector equilibrium, which all the outer edges are the same length as the edges that are going into the central black dot in the middle, central black point. And it is, you know, in a perfect structure, very not wanting to move, very, you know, equilibrious. And the golden cube octahedron is also a form of perfection. Disequilibrium perfection, that is. And the reason I'm using the word disequilibrium is when I looked recently at Buckminster Fuller's cosmic hierarchy of the forms, he doesn't have the icosahedron or the dodecahedron in that hierarchy at all. And some geometers, well known, were saying that Bucky might have left some things out, even though, of course, he used all phi ratio and his geodesic buildings of the pentagon and hexagon coming together to make those domes. But within his cosmic hierarchy of forms, he has it listed off to the side, disequilibrium form, the icosahedron. And but this disequilibrium is actually in golden proportion, which is highly perfected in this disequilibrious way that you can create patterns, which I'm about to show you, that are going to be mind-bogglingly complex and chaotic looking, but are going to blossom all these forms of creation that were totally left out of equilibrium. So we need some disequilibrium maybe to move things along. So here's the golden brick, and I discovered that it's fit into that golden rectangle face, and this will become important later on, how this grows and builds out, but that's how this little odd-looking shape was discovered. And the most important part of this is that rather than everything end up at a central dot in the middle, central point where all the vertices are the main thing, what happens here is that all of a sudden a tetrahedron is created in the middle. So now all of a sudden there's space and a form is being created in the middle rather than just a point. So we have a little tetrahedron now created in the center that is in phi proportion to the other. So this is the 0.618 out here, and that would be 1, and this whole length would be the 1.618. And now that is going to be part of this creation process, is having a tetrahedron at the center of things that can infinitely expand rather than just kind of ending at the single point. And then, so there is a bit of a difference there. So once we do this, I lay this out in the expanded version of the new creation, golden flower of life, disequilibrium pattern, whatever we want to call this, this pattern that I'm showing you with all the seeds of life around here. And when I started to connect the dots, right, you can see there's, it's not a perfect square. This is actually a golden rectangle of this form. It's sloping away from you. So these actually look like squares are actually golden rectangles that are starting from a high triangle, sloping down to a low triangle that's on the ground, sloping back up to a high triangle. This is an octahedron in the middle that's sloping down to sloping up to sloping down. And every single point, every single line that you see on this grid here is a golden cube octahedron. This shape right here, this pattern is full of the golden cube octahedron and octahedron connection just by connecting the dots between what look like squares with triangles and little obtuse triangles down here, right? We're just going around linking this together, and my mind was blown because this is the golden matrix. This is forming the golden lines of the matrix that are going to be infinitely scale invariant, producing octahedra and tetrahedras and cubes. And let me just show you. I'll just show you the next slide, because here it is in action. You know, all these forms just started to rise to the surface. It's like with a little fire underneath a bubbling, boiling pot, and they just bubbled up to the surface. And I just, you know, I could choose many, many points to create these, but I, you know, chose a more organic kind of look, spread them all over the place. You could nest them. But let me just show you what we've got going on here. And I left a bunch out, but here are the big ones at least. Well, here's our cube octahedron in its perfected form right here in the seed of life. So we've got that. Nobody's being left behind. We also have got our icosahedron over here, which is, you know, kind of analogous to the cube octahedron, icosahedron dodecahedron over here. We've got icosahedron at large scale or larger scale here. We've got a smaller icosahedron at a different angle over here. Got octahedra, rhombic dodecahedron, which looks like an upside down cube, dodecahedron, large dodeca over here. We got the stellated dodeca over here. We got the star tetrahedron over here, little triangles, one facing up, one facing down. That was an easy one. Right at the center, rhombic trichontahedra. We got a lot going on. And in that rhombic trichontahedra are all these forms. So it's just, it's an endless sea of like a quantum matrix, a golden vector matrix that's going on here with all these forms that are nested within this. And of course, this is a more complex pattern to draw by hand, but really all you have to do to even get a taste of it is just start off with something like this. And already this will merge from that. And that already is going to create the double dodeca, the paired mated pair. So where am I now? Hold on, I got to readjust to my slide. So from there, you know, new things were being dreamt of. It was like, well, how do these golden cube octahedron work together? I mean, they're kind of, this is like a cubic system that's starting to show me a cubic system, how to put these things together in a cubic type of way that's incorporating the phi ratio. So rather than everything just being hollow, empty cubes with no, I mean, phi proportion, we can always say all the forms are in this because yes, they are, and we can build off them. But how do we actually depict that with our sacred geometry? It's one thing to kind of say that and know the truth of that or at an intellectual level, but in the depiction of it and developing a real relationship to knowing the truth of that our sacred geometry, that is eternal sacred principles of drawing and then building these forms like an actual blueprint template of creation, well, then this cube is not just empty space, it's got a lot more going on. Like we know that, but all of a sudden, maybe there's more going on with these little golden matrices that are golden cube octahedron that are within this, that are part of the picture. They're going to help unlock our understanding of this golden vector matrix, rather than it just building blocks of cubes with, letters and numbers on it. So let's show just a little expansion. This is now going back from last September, 8 months ago, 8 to 9 months ago. And because this is when I really started working with the golden cube octahedron. We started off with the golden hexagon, and this has probably been, I discovered it over time. It was part of the dodecahedron, and started working with the little ones and creating different versions of different forms, how they're either interpenetrating. This one was one, I have a whole video on this. I think I show that in the next slide, what the name of the video is. But I started putting it together. I could take it apart. I could put little octahedron. It was creating little spaces. And in that video, the dynamic steady state video, I compare that to the regular cube octahedron grid, which is to the right here. And I've got image of this just in the next slide. And, there's some differences in what's going on. We have the equilibrious state to the disequilibrious state. And why this one is more disequilibrious is really because it is, that's going to be underneath some things, but let's move it way off to the side here, is because there's two golden rectangles. And when I first got started with this, I was only building the forms with one golden rectangle. So just one of these forms like this, but there's actually two, and you have to rotate it the other way to get the other one. And when the two overlap, a whole new thing starts to emerge. But these are some of the early models that started to come up to be with the golden hexagon, realizing how the icosahedron is in there, figuring out all the interconnectivity that's going on and how the dodeca and icosahedron are weaving into these patterns. And yes, this is the name of that video, the dynamic steady state universe and something. It's only 124 views. I put so much energy into this, and I did send it to Conrad Razen to discuss his model with the rhombic dodecahedron of the universe. And I'll be presenting, I guess, my own new model in just a little bit. But here is the comparison between this phi ratio version of the golden hexagon version with those golden rectangle faces compared to the regular cube octahedron. And this will always have regular size octahedron that are filling in those spaces. And this now has all of a sudden smaller octahedron that show up in it. And this one is, the larger version. It's kind of expanding. You have to picture this blue octahedron as if it's kind of inflating from 1.5 inches. So let's say this is a 1-inch edge of the cube. This is 0.5 above. This is 0.61 above, 0.618 inch above. This is now 1 full inch above. So it's kind of like that octahedron expands, and this is the phi ratio stopping point. This is the 1.5. This is the rhombic dodecahedron full 1 inch above. And it's very simple to think about these things in relationship to a breathing octahedron. And that's why it can contain all these forms of creation, because it's part of how the octahedron is going through its movements in the forms with the stable cube. So this was the first model, because as I just described, what I had to do was take the single golden ratio rectangle and turn it so I had two of them crisscrossing over one another. And I hope you'll be able to see that here. This is now looking at it as if it's from our seed of life perspective. This is the square perspective, but you could see that there's a golden rectangle here and another golden rectangle here, and that's the crisscross of them. Here it is again, going down these faces here on a slanting one here. So the golden rectangles are slanted, but it's making that little crisscross of golden rectangles in this shape. Now, the cool thing is when you do that, that what will be produced in the middle, because remember, one golden cube octahedron, where's my little blue golden cube octahedron? Remember, that makes that nice little tetrahedron right in the middle. Well, if I have two, well, there is a star tetrahedron and a cube produced in the middle now. So now all of a sudden that single dot has now become, the regular cube octahedron has expanded and created a sphere in the middle, if we put a sphere around that cube or inside that cube. And all of a sudden, it now produces more golden cube octahedrons in that. And now that little point in space becomes an infinite expanding spot or infinite imploding spot as well. Now that's throughout the whole model. Here are the first drawing of that right here in the golden, the golden seed of life, golden circle seed of life. And here's the crisscross lines that we need to get that. And there's the little blue star tetrahedron that's down at the center. Now, I built this probably a few months ago, maybe 2 to 3 months ago, and kind of had it on the side. I actually had to part with it and deconstruct it to use it for other models, but I'm thankful I had the pictures and the drawings because I just realized a few days ago, well, I woke up with the epiphany, I need to build this out of cardboard because, out of the paper, which is this one here. So I could easily do that. I could make the same shape going to the inside. I could show the triangular faces. And then all of a sudden I have my square unit, sort of square unit. It's more like a cube octahedron now because it's now balanced on both sides. Here are the golden rectangle faces, so you could see right here in the image too. There's one, it's crisscross and cross. I don't even need to extend that line. I just kept it hollow. Of course, that's easier to build. There's no sense in putting it there. But that little, if I did make a square there, it would make an octahedron that went down into the middle. And, I'm looking at this from 3 different views. This would be a cool view to draw. I haven't done it yet. Maybe someone out there will be inspired by that one. But the neat thing about this is now when these all start lining up, these are little hollow channels. I like to almost think of them as wormholes because we will get into a little universal structure in a little bit. But there's a cube, there's star tetrahedron right here at the heart of this, right at the center. And it's got 12 of these hollow channels, which actually mean those hollow channels now are actually a cube octahedron. They are, right through the center of each of these would produce the cube octahedron, one of them, that has an open hollow space between them that's now creating octahedron of different phi ratio scales around them in tetrahedra and containing a little cube. If I just connect these dots, that would be a cube. This would be the edge of a tetrahedron, another one to create the star tetrahedron. So it's just so cool to me to think that there's all this scale invariance, lifelike components happening within this simple construction. Well, of course, I've got to do the drawings because doing the drawings help to kind of internalize it, visualize it, and develop more of a relationship with it. And of course, I did it from these 2 perspectives, which is more of this square view. And this is also the hexagonal view. And these are really ones you got to visualize the depth, because remember, this is a hollow cavity in the middle here. So these are sloping down into the form here. This is really that channel that's going into the center, and it's being blocked by the triangular face here on the form. So you're not seeing the rest of the channel that's going in there. So they're quite nifty little drawings to make, and are relatively easy to do, and they shouldn't scare anybody off. Everybody can draw this quite easily, even though it looks more complex. But it is a different version than the cube octahedron because we could draw the cube octahedron easily, and that's what we've been doing, and that's the equilibrious state. That's what the flower of life is. Very easy to draw the cube octahedron. When we add the golden rectangles to it, all of a sudden we need phi ratio circles or other methods to produce this. And there's a reason why, and I'll show you in a moment, but let's have a little more fun with stacking some gold. So I've got my little gold bricks that I've put together, these golden shapes. I'm gonna make a 2x2 model, which I do have for us. I built, which of course you see the pictures, but this was, I'll love to show you at the end up close, but this was a lot of effort to make. You know, it takes a little while to make each one of those, and it just fits together perfectly. And here are those little channels. If I hold it up to the camera just right, you can see, you can look right through those all the way. And of course, this can go on and on and on, stacking these together in a cubic structure that is incorporating all these golden rectangles and the phi ratio. And you've got all these scale invariant tetrahedron and octahedron and cubes that are showing up, and you've got these cube octahedron channels going through the whole thing. I mean, it's just amazing. Here are the drawings of that from two perspectives. And for this, I went and I just drew this in the golden circle way back to the beginning, the first slides in this, when I was showing the two patterns of this, and I took out some of the circles on this one. The two patterns, the two complementary versions that are similar to this Cathara Keylontic grid of the Ruche God seed, and this one over here, which is based on something new, because it's based on the golden circle seed of life, but no one's really, that I've seen, expanded the circles out in a pattern that will continually produce these shapes in a network of the golden matrix that's going to produce all these scale invariant forms like I've been showing. So the real key thing with this is, as I said a couple slides back, is that these two perspectives are the same. They're not different things. And this is what I've been saying about in my earliest Kathara videos of, you know, rotating the Cathara grid to show it from the flower of life perspective. Now, the key difference that's going on now is that essentially the Cathara grid is the flower of life. The two are the same. They're, if you view it in the way of the sacred geometry, I mean, all this 1.5 business of the different size of that octahedra that are in it, that's all basically transferable over to the flower of life, no problem. And the thing that both of those things are missing, and if it's important, like I said early on, you'll never get rid of the phi ratio in sacred geometry. Even if you want to pretend it doesn't exist, unfortunately, you're going to wind up drawing it anyway, because it's going to be in there. It's going to be around us. It's going to be in nature. I don't know how you plan to overcome that, other than pretend it doesn't exist. But the phi ratio is the difference, the unifying thing between these two versions. And this really needed to have a different view. The traditional flower of life view did not expand out in a way, which I'll show you in a moment, that allowed for this. But both of those, like I'm saying, Cathara Grid, flower of life, they're operating under the same principles, which is essentially not including the phi ratio into them, which is very limiting to the phi ratio forms. And essentially, it really wants to kind of resist the golden ratio. And I started to try and build this out with, and I had to use many, many circles, and I started working my way around trying to create the next form over here. And it's the circles have to all kind of pinch in a little bit to make them all fit. And I mean, it's a very cool, complex looking pattern, but also not just like popping out the form like this. See, this is now very tedious to see how this links. If Occam's razor came out, he would chop that off right away. You know, he'd say, this is not, cut the page right there. Just start using this disequilibrium thing over here, okay? Because that disequilibrium pattern, it contains all the equilibrium stuff. It's not getting rid of it. It's including it into the picture. In fact, the little hollow channels that I was talking about in here, right down the center, well, that's your vector equilibrium that's right in this. All we've done is added these two important points on either side of this, which you're going to see how important those are in just a moment and why they're there. But let's just finish this slide up first. So, you know, life is really a mix of both. This here has both of these disequilibrium and equilibrium together mixed into this circle template, which is doable in this. It's just the circle template itself is struggling to incorporate the phi ratio because that hexagonal structure, and when you start to build it out past the original golden circle seed of life, because these are all golden circles in here, it really wants to continue to hold on to the no change of the hexagon. It doesn't want to produce the golden hexagon in other areas very easily. So it's a bit of no change, static, and holding, which, you know, there's many unchanging things. You know, there's a big universal unchanging thing, but we also have perfect disequilibrium within that change and movement that is happening. And also, instead of holding, kind of letting go within that flow and movement. And this is what that pattern really represented for me. It was really kind of a letting go into, let's see what something new emerges from trying something out with George Odom's triangle design, really. And this is really why I worked on all this to this degree, because we wanted to incorporate all 5 Platonic solids into a pattern that actually contained them, into a circle pattern that would include the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, right? Well, the icosahedron always represented the water, and water is life. So if we have a pattern that is not incorporating our icosahedron, well, then we're missing out on one of these forms that are a root foundation of creation. And here it is from 2 versions. Now, see, the midpoint of this we can call the normal vector equilibrium spot. And you see how this is slightly, this is an octahedron, actually. It's not just a little square. This is an octahedron. All these points are octahedra. So we're going to be building octahedra, and we could build cubes off of these spots just as much as we could build them off the center of the forms in here. So, but this little spacing, this little gap here allows to create, and it matches over here, and it goes through the form. So this line is not on the surface of the form at this point. It's going back behind it. The same thing here. See, this is now connecting to the vertices behind this form. So I'm showing you the form up front, but remember, this is kind of like a matrix, a fabric of interconnectivity that's now woven into the vertices that this whole form is producing. And I'm just showing it as a solid. But that's the distance, right? That distance is 1, let's just say. That's 1 inch. One unit, and we need that 1 all the way around, and this would be the 0.618 right here, and that allows on either side, see right here, there's the 0.618 on either side of that little octahedra that's right there. Now that all of a sudden is serving great purpose in this layout, is going to establish the ability to connect the dots all the way around to create our dodecahedron, and from this view too. So we will show right here that here is one of those little corners going up over to here, connecting up to this corner. See, these are the little corners. Those are where the little octahedra are. There's one there. You find that bar, it goes across this octahedra. So that's a line going through a middle of an octahedron that would be in this space. Right now it's a hollow spot, but it's another octahedron that plugs in there. So I'm just focusing on micro pieces. This is so interconnected and interwoven with different forms. It's a little mind-boggling, but this phi ratio forms, the dodecahedron and icosahedron, and we are children of the ether. Where's the spirit? Well, we're infusing these things back into our cubic grid, okay? That's really what this is about, and why I've taken such great lengths to try and depict it. Now it's really up to others whether they want to try and work with this, draw with it, do you resonate with the images or not? Maybe this looks too outer spacey or something. I'm not sure, but it is doing what it was intended to do. And the flower pattern, the disequilibrious flower pattern, is now showing showing how these forms can be created within it in a cubic system. That's the key point, because like with my early videos of looking at Dan Winter's Star Child and the star mother and the star child that I made of it on it. I do these implosive diagrams where I show everything coming from a central point, and we're building the same rhombic trichontahedron, or let's just call it a dodecahedron, larger and larger and larger, scaling at infinite phi ratio. And while I was doing that, I was like, how does that fit into a point in space everywhere? How do we depict that with sacred geometry? And how does that relate to, like, the cubic version of Metatron's cube? How do we link cubes together and do that? And this is what that's doing, because we can now do these forms at infinite scales all throughout this cubic matrix. Now it gets a little complex when I start to say, well, I could turn this whole cubic matrix into a five-fold symmetry and turn this whole thing into a large dodecahedron, but let's leave that for another video. Basically, what I want to just keep with the basics and say we're just dealing with the one cubic system, like we're stacking little dice together. But at least when we're stacking those dice, we've got some vertices that are showing up that are going to connect the dots to, and I need 7 more of these to start to link up those things, at least in this structure. Now, at the small cubes, this could all be happening at a scale that's too small for me to build. But as you could see, this is the unification now of the dodeca and icasa, which is kind of the unity of the earth, air, fire, water, ether, because all our Platonic solids now are beautifully nested within this golden matrix structure. And now that has the rhombic trichontahedron, which I didn't draw in the lines to show how that connects, but that would have those 30 rhombic diamond-shaped faces within this. And then we have all sorts of other cubes. We have all that other matrix going on in there. And I don't feel particularly inclined to at least try and draw it right now, because I have in other cases. It makes this picture probably more complex than it needs to be. Okay, so hopefully you could see how that's all fitting in, how that's all weaving together, how it's all working out in these models. And I have a few more slides here. We're almost getting to the end because I have some new ideas. And I always love this, going back to the universal structure of the egg carton universe, octahedral structure, first introduced in 1997. And, as I'm working on this, I'm like, wow, these are really some nice little egg containers here, right? If you wanted to put some eggs together, transport your eggs to a friend's house for breakfast, and you showed up with one of these, and you open it up and show all the awesome eggs you have inside and how well protected they were, and then you tell them, hey, this is maybe the structure of our universe based on the octahedral egg carton view of the universe. Those would be some pretty darn golden eggs they had that morning. This is potentially a possibility that I'm exploring with this is, let's take a look at this slide, right? This little image right over here. See, they have octahedra, and along the octahedron is where our solar systems, galaxies are being spread out along this octahedral edges that follow this, and there's nodal clusters. And these are more than just points in space. And this is why I find what I'm working on here very interesting about these little empty spaces, which were the cubes. Remember these little cubes that come together in these hollow channels that are actually following the edges of octahedra that are meeting one another? And here's our little eggs that would be inside here. Well, the eggs are inside the octahedra here, and these little empty spaces here are channels, like energy arteries of solar systems and galaxies, quasars and neutrons, or whatever else is out there, and cloud and gas and nebula. And then there's these void spaces in between, right? Well, this is just something for someone who's a lot more into discovering these sort of things, or knows more about the physics of how this all works out. It's just something that occurred to me, that maybe there's some possibility than our straight edged version of just connect the dot game that we've been playing so long, but maybe phi ratio, because it's so intimately linked to our universal structure and fabric throughout the life and everywhere else, maybe that these little gap that's produced between the icosahedron and dodecahedron, or as I just showed in the other slides, remember this little gap that I'm talking about is really the key between where you have an icasa and a dodeca, That's the little artery that goes through, a little channel of energy that goes to a cube. Well, maybe those are, here's the large octahedron coming over, they crisscross, they create a nice little happy family of stars, and then they follow along that channel, and they get to another happy family of stars. And if this is how this model's working out, maybe it's more than just connect the dots, and actually has a container that works around it, and maybe it's related to these things. So this is my highly speculative thing. I don't know if I'll be able to come to answers, but if someone watching this video of that aptitude or background, they might want to explore that a little bit more, because this is all based on the golden ratio. There's nothing here that I've made up. It's all coming from the sacred geometry. It's all built from the templates of the forms and the circle patterns that I'm showing you. These forms exist right here, and they're also malleable, you know, almost like a neural network. There's some flexibility in this, and I could see that there could be more lifelike movement in this around these features, even more so than the paper when this gets organic, that has qualities to it that are not so rigid as a regular cube octahedron. And of course, that's not built in the same way. But when everything is just equally arm's length and the points just all meet together, this is a very stable form. Most stable form that exists, because of those edge lengths are all the same and will make a perfect equilibrium balanced structure, where this, well, now that equilibrium state is in the middle of that channel, and now it's got some wiggle room around that channel. And I'm just kind of going with the flow here of, I didn't think this too far through, but anyway, I want to show you how this grows now, because everything here is going inward, and this is actually part of a expanding form. Here's the basic unit. I call it the double golden brick. There's 4 of them, actually, 4 little golden bricks. I call this shape the golden brick. Well, one of them by itself, this is already double, but there it is, the bigger one. And that was the one that plugged into the excuse me, the golden cube octahedron. Remember, that plugged into the side of it. This was kind of a really mind-blowing to me when I started working with that. But now remember, I crisscross them like this, and I put them on both sides. And then I have this basic elemental unit that I can construct the whole thing out of. And inside it is an octahedron. So in this little thing that I'm spinning my fingers around here, inside this edge down to that edge, and the edge that's behind that one, that's it. But these are 2 golden rectangles. And this kind of reminds me of a photon of light picture. So anyway, I'll go around this form and I'll plug all those in, and that's what you're looking at here. So I have that one here built for you too. And so now I've gone around and constructed the form out of 6 of those shapes, 6 octahedra with the golden rectangles around it from that view, and from that view, the same ones there. Of course, I've done the drawings again, and at the end of each of these is a cube that will be built. That's why there's the 4 petaled design, because that builds a cube. I will say it is a little easier to build the golden brick road from this perspective, and I'm going to switch over to that one in just a moment, because the way these overlap from this perspective is not just plugging them together like this on a flat plane where the front is the same as the back. Once I turn it to this, I got to figure out how that one fits behind this and also pops out to the side. So I can do that. It just is not as easy to pave the way with than this one over here. The cool thing about this is when I split this one open into 2 halves, you'll see that, well, there's the tetrahedron, or the tetrahedron there. There's the tetrahedron there. I put those 2 together. There's our star tetrahedron at the middle. There's our channel that's going through the middle, to 12 of them off of that central space. And this is kind of like an octahedron that is truncated at the top, and it's just a large truncated tetrahedron, truncated octahedron, with just these pieces missing, with these grooves. And really, I guess to flow with this sacred geometry, you got to get your groove on, because it's all about these grooves. The grooves are like the highways, I believe, of what's bringing this thing to life. And so let's take a look at the next slides. And we got two more as I build this one out. Whoops, I don't want to get to that one yet. We got eight cubic cells now, and that's essentially what this one is. Except now I've taken my little unit and I'm starting to show how that builds off the top like that. And I'd have to build quite a few more of these to go all the way around. And then I would create what I've just shown in the drawing. And just remember, this now is producing this next docking station for these little cubes. And we've got bigger cubes here and the different size octahedron and then a larger cube of the whole thing. And you can see how this works, right? But remember, this is now, all of this is still going to link up and create the icosahedron and dodecahedron. And we could do that at a few different scales as we get larger to the 512 version of the golden matrix. So now this is the 512 version of this, right? So I've expanded it all the way out, and now you just have to visualize that every single one of those little nodal points that are these little edges along that opening are the potential to draw another icosahedron or dodecahedron off of that. And this is how the phi ratio forms weave into this grid-like pattern of cubes. And it really has come down to the discoveries that led me to this would not have been possible without first connecting to the golden hexagon and the golden cube octahedron, this little shape right here, and doubling the golden cube octahedron, rotating it, are really what did it. So, of course, this can continue to build and build and build and build, and will infinitely fill space. So hopefully that you found all this quite interesting and expansive, and maybe there's a lot of questions. Maybe there's some interest in wanting to connect with more of the drawings of this, because I do believe that once you start to draw the forms and relate to them in that way, you start to develop a connection and relationship, or even having the imagery around, you start to see the connections, but really getting the hands-on experience of drawing or building the forms start to connect one to them. And it's as simple as just starting making the cube or the star tetrahedron, right? And doing the forms as they're out there. So there's just so much potential. And this is really a kind of new frontier in sacred geometry to integrate and connect the golden ratio to a cubic building structure that really just fits right inside the cube, and the vector equilibrium is all there, just like it is described to be, right? So a couple new circle patterns there. Let's just do a little show and tell with the different forms. And this one is one portion of the one half of the double golden brick with the inside and the outside. And you can see that it has the kind of squishy flexibility to it. So I like the feel of that. I'm really curious about what other things might come from that, but you can see it's just the crisscross. It's two double golden rectangles. And we have the single one, which I showed you quite a bit of already, right? And those are the 12 rays that come out. And this one you saw a lot of, the golden cube octahedron with the tetrahedron in the middle. When you put two of those together, you get the full tetrahedron in the middle. And the double golden brick. We have the large one, which is just so amazing to look at. I mean, this right here is a cube octahedron right at the center of this, right? And here are the octahedron meeting at the middle of that point. I mean, it's totally incorporating everything we know about sacred geometry. It's just adding more to it. And I don't see why there would be any resistance, or why there would be resistance to an idea of something that incorporates the golden ratio. But here it is from this perspective of, it's kind of like a vector equilibrium, but this is a vector disequilibrium because of all the way that the little openings are, creating the opportunities for the Icasa dodeca to link and weave through our pattern. And this is the one that I could open up. I don't have any eggs in here, but I do have the golden octahedron that's in there just to show how that relates, and that will this is tetrahedron off the side. So this is creating a star tetrahedron within there. When I put the other component, that other piece back on there, well, I just created the full star tetrahedron right inside there. And this could just come out like this and kind of plug in on the back side and on the other portions of the side of the form over here. And these are little tetrahedron that would fit in there like that. What if I made smaller ones? So just, yeah, really, really cool and amazing how that all kind of just fits together, incorporates those forms. Just one last one here was the, this one here, which was the growing version of it. From this view and that view, you take them apart just like in there. And there is where our star tetrahedron, there's looking down one of the arms of it. There's 3 arms in there and the third down there. So that's all extending out and connecting up with the other forms. And really the heart of it, this is really where it got started, was with the first big form, which is it's opening up and coming apart here. I made it like I can open the lid to show where the tetrahedron is in there. And there's the octahedron down in there, and the other tetrahedron already fell out. But it gets the idea across. And that's how it really got generated and started. And crisscrossing these, that gives you the dodecahedron and the connecting points with the tetrahedron that's not there. Okay, well, that was quite a bit. That's, months and months of work and contemplating this. It kind of all came together for me. I really love to hear what you think about all this. I hope you stuck with me. And check out the New Geometers Facebook group. I continue to post the images related to this and many other things. Next video is going to scale it down to something a little bit more simple. I'm going to do that tribute to George Odom and a lot of his discoveries that are also evolving now with the work that I'm doing. And yeah, I've got a New Geometry Patreon if you're interested in starting at the very, very basics of drawing this. This is not on iPad or anything like that. I teach with the iPad on there, but I want to present opportunities to start doing basic drawings, starting with just, the seed of life and, other forms that can be created in that right from the start. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm so appreciative you stuck with me. Please subscribe to the channel, and I have more great new content coming to you soon. Okay, love to you all. Peace.